So in this video, this little revision video, we're going to be looking at principles of training. So the first one is looking at progressive overload. This is a principle of training, and it means working the body at a greater rate than normal and then gradually increasing the stress as it adapts to these exercise training levels. So it's a bit of a mouthful, that, but progressive overload is working the body harder than it normally does and then gradually over time increasing the stress of the work as the body has adapted to the exercises during the training. So this is an example of how it might look, and this might help you visualize it a bit better. So on Monday you might do 3 miles running in 20 minutes, and then again on Thursday. Rest of the week you don't do anything. Then the next week, a week later, you do it 3 times, the same distance in the same amount of time. And then the next week you do it 3 times, but if you look closely at the details, the first session on Monday is 3.5 miles in 20 minutes rather than 3 miles. On Wednesday, back to 3 miles in 20 minutes, and then on Friday, 3.5 miles running in 20 minutes again. So you can see how from the first week to the third week, there's been an increase in the stress of the work because you're doing 3.5 miles in 20 minutes rather than 3 miles. And then if we look at the fourth week, there's another increase in stress, another progressive overload. You're now being expected to run 5 miles in 30 minutes on the Monday, again 3 miles running in 20 minutes on the Wednesday, and then 5 miles on Friday in 30 minutes as well. So it's going up, it's being progressively overloaded, your training. And then we're going to talk about the FIT principle. So hopefully you will remember what FIT stands for. Frequency, so how often you train. Is it once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, twice a day, etc. Intensity, so how hard are you training. Time, how long are you training for? Is it 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour? And what type of training are you using? What method of training? We know our methods of training: plyometric, circuit, continuous, fartlek, interval, weight resistance, all those things we've discussed before. So that's the FIT principle. As you can see, it spells out FIT down the side on the left. Frequency, intensity, time, type. So what does specificity mean? So the specificity principle requires an understanding of the need of the game or event you're taking part in. So if you are doing cycling, you need to understand the needs of that event. Understand the needs of cycling. Same with swimming. If you're doing football, you need to understand the sport and its needs. So when you train, there's specificity because you are geared towards the needs of the specific sport and activity in order to improve your fitness of the body parts that sport uses. So if you're a cyclist, there's no point training all your arm muscles like a swimmer might, or a shot putter might, or a discus thrower might. So that's why that you need to have specificity. Your training needs to be specific to your sport, so you can improve the fitness of the body parts you need and the body parts you use. And then we need to look at individual needs, so matching training to the requirements of an individual. Overtraining, this happens when you train beyond your body's ability to recover. So every time you train, your body generally can recover and then you can train again. So I go to the gym at school and I'll go in the afternoon and I might do an hour in the gym, lifting weights, doing body weight things like push-ups, pull-ups, and the next day I can do it again because my body's had the ability to recover. But if you overtrain, you train too much and you don't get that adequate rest and recovery, then you've overtrained and this could cause injury. So if I went to the gym in the morning, at lunchtime and in the afternoon, I might really hurt my shoulder if all I'm doing is things using my shoulder, and then the next day my shoulder might be hurting, I might be injured, and I've overtrained. Reversibility, this means any adaptation that takes place as a consequence of training will be reversed when you stop training. So for example, the background, you can see someone's a sprinter. If they're doing lots of sprinting, say they train for 9 months straight and they reduce their sprinting time, their 100-meter time, from 14 seconds to 11 seconds, and they've developed all their muscle fibers and their muscles to work how they need them to work in the sprinting. Then if they stop and don't do it for 6 months, their time's going to creep back up again. They'll go from 11 seconds maybe back to 14 seconds, maybe even longer. Because once you've stopped doing the training, it will be reversed back to what it was before. Thresholds of training, also called training zones, and we use these to make sure our training is most effective. So we know what zones we're in and what we're going to get out of training. So how can we calculate your training threshold? We've talked about this before. You want to calculate your maximum heart rate. Think quickly, what's the formula? We know maximum heart rate is 220 minus your age. So I am 24. So what will my heart rate be? 220 minus 24 is 196. You guys, you know, in year 10 and 11, you're probably around 15. So 220 minus 15. Yep, 205. So your max heart rate is 205. There we go. 205 is the max heart rate for a 15-year-old. So 60% of your maximum heart rate is going to be 123 beats per minute. 80% is 164 beats per minute. And we know between 60% to 80% of your maximum heart rate is the aerobic threshold, where you're working with air, like long distance running, cycling, things like that. And then from 80 to 90%, we know that's the anaerobic threshold, where you're working without air, things like shot put, sprints, jumping, things like that. And that's 171, so 171 beats per minute. So, like we just discussed, to work in your aerobic zone, you want to be working between 60 to 80%. For a 15-year-old, that's between 123 beats per minute and 164 beats per minute. And again, to work in your anaerobic zone, between 80 and 90%, and that's between 164 and 171 beats per minute. Remember, 100% of your heart rate is 205 for a 15-year-old. So, have a pause of this on screen, see if you can match the definition of the principle of training with its explanation. So pause it. Once you've had a go, I'll play it. Right, hopefully you've had a go. So let's have a look. So the fit principle. What's the definition for fit principle? Frequency, intensity, time, type. And then this principle allows you to increase demands of training by increasing how often, how hard, how long, what type of exercise. So you can increase your frequency, how often you're training, your intensity, how hard you're training, time, how long, and type. So what type of exercise, you might change it to make it harder. Then if we look at individual needs in light green, so that's matching training to the requirements of an individual. And the explanation is very self-explanatory. Training should be targeted at what type of fitness the person needs to improve. Then if we look at the light blue, progressive overload, which we know is to gradually increase the amount of overload so that fitness gains occur but without potential for injury. So if a person hadn't done any exercise before, it's important to gradually increase the demands of training. That would be an explanation of progressive overload. We looked at the example, remember, just a few moments ago, where they were running 3 times a week, then they were running for further in the same amount of time, then further with more time, and training more often. Reversibility, so any adaptation that takes place as a consequence of training will be reversed when you stop training. So it will be reversed, reversibility. So if a person is injured or stops training, they will lose the fitness they gained when they stop. So once you stop, your fitness will start to decrease. Specificity, so that's being specific, matching training to the requirements of an activity. So if a sportsman wants to improve their ability in basketball, they need to practice their shooting. They wouldn't go off and start playing football. And finally, overtraining, training beyond your body's ability to recover. So it's important you allow time for the body to recover, otherwise you'll pick up an injury. So, sorry, I was skipping through that. So we're going to just have a look at this question briefly. So explain how a coach would apply the principles of training in the following situation. Amanda is a very keen and talented trampolinist who regularly attends a trampolining club. She is returning to training after a severe ankle injury. So what do you think are the key points in this question? Well, it's asking you to explain how a coach, so explain how a coach, not Amanda, how a coach would apply the principles of training in this situation. So it says Amanda is a keen and talented trampolinist and she attends a trampolining club regularly, but she's just returning to training because she had a severe ankle injury. So if you're Amanda's coach, what principles of training are you going to be applying? So you need to make your point, state which principles of training that will need to be applied when she returns, explain what these principles are, so give the definitions we just looked at in the last slide, give examples of how these principles should be applied, again we just did that in the last slide, and then finish the sentence, the last sentence just to summarise what you've discussed. So have a pause, have a think, jot some ideas down, and then we'll go through what you need. So this is a model answer from the question we just looked at. So in order for Amanda to return to training successfully, the principles of training that need to be considered are individual needs, specificity, overtraining, and progressive overload. So they're the 4 ones we need to focus on. Her coach will need to take into account the severity of the ankle injury, i.e. her individual needs. So there's the first point being made on individual need, the first principle of training, and ensure that she does specific actions that she would do in trampolining. So that's looking at the specificity principle of training. So that's 2 already covered. The coach would also need to ensure that she doesn't make the injury worse by doing too much. Gradually increasing the intensity of training will help this. So we're looking at the progressive overload here. The types of exercise that the coach could get Amanda to do are calf raises, as this emulates, so this mimics, it copies the action of the ankle on the trampoline. By considering progressive overload, the coach could increase the weight each session or the number of repetitions. You see how that's progressive overload because they're increasing the weight each session or they're increasing the reps each session. And then, so they've just talked about progressive overload and now they're going to finish talking about overtraining. To avoid overtraining, this would be done in a gradual way. So not increasing the weights every single session by crazy amounts, but doing it gradually, nice and slowly, so our body can adapt and get stronger. So to conclude, the coach must consider a variety of principles of training to allow Amanda to successfully return to the sport, so to successfully return to a trampolining club. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of help how you would approach this in an exam. Well done, guys.